Have you ever encountered or witnessed bullying incidents in your school when you were young? Children who are bullied often become less confident and emotionally volatile. On the other hand, those who bully others tend to derive pleasure from their actions and believe that violence can solve any problem. Gradually, they develop psychological abnormalities. During my childhood in the 90s and 2000s, Israel was a country widely admired by Chinese society. Many people would talk about how they had suffered in the past, how they fought bravely in wars, how their economy thrived, and how technologically advanced they were. They also emphasized the Jewish people's focus on tradition and so on. However, as time has passed, the bubble has burst, and Israel has become a militaristic country under neo-Nazi rule. How did this oppressed nation become one of the world's craziest oppressors today? Let's explore Israel together. According to the 1947 United Nations resolution on the partition of Palestine, the area of the State of Israel is 15,200 square kilometers. However, through military occupation, they currently control an area of 25,000 square kilometers. The population is 9.26 million. It's worth noting that within the Israeli-controlled areas, Jews account for only 74% of the population, while Arabs make up 21%. Israel is located in West Asia and shares borders with Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. It has access to both the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea, making it a junction of three continents, Asia, Africa, and Europe. Its coastline stretches for 198 kilometers, and it has a Mediterranean climate. Summers are hot and dry, with temperatures reaching up to 39 degrees Celsius, while winters are mild and humid, with temperatures around 4 degrees Celsius. Now let's delve into this extremely complex history, keeping in mind that one of the biggest differences between ancient and modern societies is the absence of a clear concept of ethnicity. Generally, different ways of life and access to resources based on living environments give rise to various ethnic groups gradually. The area where Paris is located today was called Canaan in ancient times, and the people there mostly spoke Semitic languages. There were many different ethnic groups. Almost all human civilizations, when developing their beliefs in the early stages, shaped the divine world according to human forms. They had god-kings and various other gods, who managed different aspects of life. However, among these Canaanite people, there emerged an unprecedented monotheistic religion called Judaism. They believed in only one all-knowing and all-powerful God. So, Jewish people are those who adhere to Judaism. Initially, they were primarily defined by religious affiliation. Their scriptures are called the Tanakh, known as the Old Testament in Christianity, and sometimes referred to as the Hebrew Bible in modern academia. The Tanakh vividly constructs an epic narrative of the Jewish nation, led by divine guidance, departing from Egypt and establishing their rule in the land of Canaan. However, it is important to note that archaeological and historical evidence is scarce for this narrative. Nonetheless, it established the notion that Canaan was their promised land. According to their account, they built 2 temples. The first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, and the second one was demolished by the Romans. What remains today is the Western Wall, which they claim to be the remnants of the Second Temple. Subsequently, many Jews fled from the region and wandered within the Roman Empire. Later, Christianity emerged, followed by the rise of Islam. This region has been a place of conflict and competing narratives. In the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire conquered Palestine. Although the rulers were Muslims, the Ottoman Empire was a classical pluralistic empire with diverse ethnicities and faiths. They implemented a system called the millet, similar to China's vassal system in ancient times. Each ethnic group governs itself, while its leader pledges allegiance to the ruler. During this period, the Ottomans rebuilt the city walls and the old city of Jerusalem, which was divided into Armenian, Christian, Muslim, and Jewish quarters. From these facts, we can derive 2 basic truths. Firstly, there were Jewish inhabitants in this region in ancient times, but they were not the only ones residing there. It was a mixed area, not exclusively for Jews. Secondly, although many Jews left the region later on, there have always been Jews living there. Therefore, the claim that Jewish people had no homeland is not valid. However, the main proponents of establishing the State of Israel were those who had left and settled in Europe. Now let's talk about these people. Jewish identity is primarily based on religion, connecting communities with their way of life, names, accents, dietary habits, etc., making them easily recognizable. However, ancient Europe was a Christian society, and according to Christian narratives, Jews were the ones who betrayed Jesus. Therefore, Jews were unable to assimilate into mainstream society. They could only engage in what were considered fringe professions. For example, they excelled in finance, accumulating wealth through interest and lending money to kings for warfare or serving as tax officials for kings. Sometimes, when the kings or nobles couldn't repay their debts or encountered natural disasters like the Black Death, they would expel the Jews. At that time, the Jewish people had no moral advantage in society, so they were abandoned. That's why when we discussed the Southeast Asian series earlier, do you remember? We referred to the Southeast Asian Chinese as the Eastern Jews. Later on, history underwent three major transformations. First, the world entered the era of capitalism, and those who excelled in financial matters became the elites. The Jews transitioned from being clowns in Shakespeare's plays to financial capitalists. The Second, Great Britain established parliamentary politics through reform, allowing the capitalist elite to obtain power and status, such as the famous Rothschild family, whose name was well known during the early days of the Internet, as if they controlled the whole world, even though the Rothschilds themselves did not realize how great they were. Third, with the French Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars, and the 1848 Spring of Nations Revolution, nationalism, and the ideology of establishing nation-states gradually arose in Europe. While Jews were doing well in England, they still had no status on the European continent, especially in Eastern Europe. In Russian, there is a word that was later introduced into English called pogrom, which refers to violent acts against Jews in Eastern Europe. At that time, many Jews were killed in Russia, and they often suffered political persecution, which led to the emergence of nationalism through violence and conflict. An Austrian Jewish journalist from Vienna, Theodor Herzl, called on Jews around the world to return to their promised land and restore their national way of life. Their actions were called Zionism, and in 1897, they held the first Zionist Congress in Switzerland, proposing to leave these anti-Semitic societies and establish a Jewish state. This idea became a political movement, and Herzl proposed going to Argentina or Palestine. The then British Secretary of State for the Colonies, Joseph Chamberlain, suggested, "Hey, we can give you 5,000 square miles in our Ugandan colony in Africa." If the Zionists had accepted this proposal at the time, the matter would have been settled. They even sent an inspection team to Uganda, but they found the African lions too frightening, and Palestine had more religious appeal. I want to interject here with an opinion. Many people now like to translate Zionism as Jewish restorationism, but I think this is a kind of textual propaganda. Restorationism assumes that they had a country before, and this land belongs to them. They were only forced into exile. Now they have the legal right to restore and rebuild it. However, as we mentioned earlier, Jews have always lived in the Palestine region, and they have always been subjects of various regimes. Moreover, in ancient times, there were no passports, and many ethnic groups migrated for various reasons, such as fleeing war, seeking resources, seeking space, commercial migration, military conquest, etc. This was common, and it does not mean that the place they left behind belongs to them forever. If we say that, then the world would be chaotic. Therefore, I do not agree with the idea of restorationism. Furthermore, their original idea was to avoid political persecution in Europe and find a place to establish a Jewish national state. They considered many places initially, but Palestine had more religious appeal and was easier to gain support. So we need to pay attention to the fact that this movement is not about restorationism, religion, or representing all Jews. It is only a secular nationalist movement of European Jews. At that time, Palestine was not an empty land, but rather part of the Ottoman Empire. The Zionists came up with a cage-for-birds swap idea. Jewish immigrants first mixed with the superior European Jews, then funded poor Jews to buy land and homes in Palestine. Politically, they obtained the tacit approval of the Ottoman Empire, because Jewish immigrants could offset the local Arab population. The Ottoman Empire could act as an arbitrator and reduce its governance costs. Secondly, Jews brought advanced technology from Europe. For example, with the influx of Jews, Ottoman citrus exports gradually increased, bringing economic benefits. These Jewish communities were called Yishuv, and the Jews who lived here for generations were called Old Yishuv, while the new immigrants were called New Yishuv. However, the Zionist plan would never have been realized without the two world wars, which disrupted the world order. Chaos is a ladder, and the Zionists seized this opportunity. During World War I, European empires wanted to dismantle the Ottoman Empire, and Jewish groups took the opportunity to influence the British cabinet. The knowledge sector had famous British chemist Chaim Weizmann, while the economic sector had the Rothschild family, both of whom worked together. Britain also knew that Jews had financial power globally, and was afraid that they would fund their enemies. Therefore, in the end, British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour issued the Balfour Declaration, which said, 1. The British government supports the establishment of a Jewish national homeland in the Palestine region. 2. The British government will do its best to assist in achieving this goal. 3. This matter cannot undermine the rights of non-Jewish residents in the area, or the rights of Jews in other countries. Note that at the time, Britain was willing to make any promise to dismantle the Ottoman Empire, not just to Jews. They also told Arabs that if they rebelled, they could establish an Arab empire after the war. This was a reckless promise. After World War I ended, the British turned their backs on the Arabs, together with the French, and divided the Ottoman Empire's territory. There was no unified Arab entity. Moreover, with the letter they gave to the Zionists, they obtained the trusteeship of the Palestine region, but the Arabs were very dissatisfied with violence to resist British rule and Jewish immigration. Britain's governance costs were skyrocketing. To pacify the Arabs, Britain gradually restricted Jewish immigration, but this only angered the Jews. Zionist extremists established a terrorist group called Irgun, and launched various attacks against Palestine. During World War II, the Nazis carried out a systematic genocide of the Jews. Further pushed to migrate to Palestine, the Jews were prevented by the British. In the eyes of the fleeing Jews, the British became their biggest enemy. In order to strike back at the British, some Zionists formed an extreme organization called Lehi in 1940 and planned to collaborate with the Nazis. They proposed that if the Nazis could transfer the Jews in the occupied areas to Palestine, they would fight alongside the Nazis. Later, seeing that the Nazis were no longer viable and the Soviet Union was gaining momentum, they turned to the Soviet Union. After the end of World War II, the extremist organization launched even more aggressive attacks. In 1946, they bombed a hotel where the British-controlled Palestinian government was located, killing 91 people, including 17 Jews. It was already a powder keg. The British felt they could no longer stay, and in 1947, the United Nations passed Resolution 181 to establish an Arab-led Palestinian state and a Jewish-led Israel in the region of Palestine, while Jerusalem would be under international supervision. It's worth noting that at the time, Jews only accounted for 1/3 of the local population and possessed only 7% of the land. However, the partition plan gave 56% of the land to Israel, which the Arabs could not accept as it was clearly unfair. As a result, Arabs and Jews in Palestine engaged in bloody conflict. In 1948, two Jewish groups launched the Deir Yassin massacre, killing hundreds of residents in the Arab village near Jerusalem, and taking some of them to parade in the streets of Jerusalem. Unfortunately, this place later became a mental hospital. Then there was the Palestinian Exodus, in which 700,000 Arabs were forced to leave their homes. On May 14, 1948, Israel was established and the political movement to establish a Jewish state was officially successful. The Middle East war broke out immediately, with Arab countries forming a coalition to drive the Jews out militarily. Although the Arabs had more weapons, a lot of Jews had gained experience in World War II and managed to overcome the first wave. Then the United Nations stepped in to mediate, but at this point, Israel managed to obtain weapons with help from wealthy Jews around the world, while infighting occurred among the Arab coalition, causing the ceasefire agreement to collapse and the conflict to continue. Israel eventually won, and Jordan, as the commander of the Arab coalition, spilled the blood of the Arab people and occupied the West Bank of the Jordan River, which rightfully belonged to the Palestinians. This was the First Middle East War. In 1956, the Second Middle East War broke out. Egyptian President Nasser sought to nationalize the Suez Canal, which was controlled by Britain and France, but Israel was worried that Egypt would ban their ships from passing through. So they joined forces. Egypt was militarily defeated, but Nasser succeeded in drawing the intervention of the United States and the Soviet Union. Britain, France, and Israel were forced to withdraw their troops, and Egypt successfully nationalized the Suez Canal, making Nasser a hero of the Arab nation. This war also dealt a devastating blow to the imperial system of Britain and France. In 1967, the Third Middle East War broke out as the intensity of the Cold War grew. The United States provided Israel with a large amount of weapons, while the Soviet Union provided Egypt, Jordan, and Syria with weapons. Nasser wanted a big victory over Israel and to destroy it. However, Israel managed to push back in just 6 days, occupying the Gaza Strip and Sinai Peninsula of Egypt, the West Bank, Jerusalem, Jordan, and the Golan Heights of Syria. Nasser was mentally devastated and resorted to a war of attrition with Israel to negotiate the return of the Sinai Peninsula. He died of exhaustion in 1970. The Fourth Middle East War broke out in 1973, when Egyptian President Sadat led a surprise attack on Israel during Yom Kippur, which is the Jewish Day of Atonement. The United States supported Israel, and the Arab leader suffered a humiliating defeat. Under American mediation, they signed a contract recognizing Israel as an Arab state and withdrew from the Soviet camp. Israel subsequently returned the Sinai Peninsula. With Egypt's decline, Arab nationalism, which aimed to strike Israel, shifted to religious nationalism. There were two paths, one led by Saudi Arabia in the Gulf Cooperation Council region, which did not promote Arab nationalism, only supporting Palestine with financial aid to fight. They did not push for or lead a comprehensive war. The other path was the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979 that established an Islamic theocracy. Although Iran is not a Sunni Islamic country and not an Arab nation, they are deeply influenced by religion. They serve as a thorn in the side of Israel for the United States in the Middle East. They hope to eradicate them. Therefore, Iran acts as a rear base providing funds, weapons, training, intelligence, and other support to frontline organizations fighting against Israel. For example, in 1982, a Palestinian gunman wounded the Israeli ambassador to the UK, which led Israel to launch military operations in Lebanon and Syria. In previous Middle East conflicts, Israel had always been on the defensive, but this time they were the aggressors. The regular armies of Lebanon and Syria were no match for Israel, and they suffered significant losses. Israel also supported the Christian community in Lebanon and established the South Lebanon Army, which carried out massacres of Palestinian refugees and political opponents with military support. This event should be remembered because we will mention it later. Under the support of Iran, Lebanese industrial factions armed themselves and formed Hezbollah, engaging in guerrilla warfare against Israel. While they were not a match for Israel in direct confrontation, their guerrilla tactics actually weakened the Israeli military. Various regions learned from Hezbollah's grassroots, armed combat experience, and formed a resistance network. Currently, Iraq, Syria, Houthi armed forces in Yemen, and Palestinian Hamas are all part of this network. They are the armed forces that continuously strike against Israel. After transforming into guerrilla forces, Arab countries have not launched any Middle East wars since Egypt abandoned its alliance with Israel. This has essentially stabilized the existence of the State of Israel. As for the Palestinian state that the United Nations resolution aimed to establish, it is now fragmented. This is the international context. Let's take a look at the domestic situation in Israel. Through continuous military conflicts, Israel has gradually transformed itself into a right-wing, conservative, militaristic regime. Due to decades of Israeli political propaganda, and the fact that many Chinese intellectuals used to idolize Israel, we have developed many misconceptions about Israel and the Jewish people. Let's clarify some concepts. The most significant characteristic of Jewish people is that they invented monotheism. Their recognized method today is either you believe in Judaism or your mother is Jewish. So it is not purely based on bloodline recognition, but also a strong religious identification. As Judaism spread outward, Jewish people actually have various backgrounds. Since it is a religious ethnic group, Zionists rely on myths to justify their claims. However, they cannot resolve a religious issue within the myth, which is that the destruction of Israel was the will of God. God never said that Jewish people can establish a country. Jewish people should wait patiently for their Messiah to save them. Therefore, after the establishment of Israel, many overseas Jews did not migrate there. This is a nationalist movement disguised with religious stories. The first wave of immigrants to Israel mainly consisted of Eastern European Jews. Ben Gurion was born in Poland. Sheraton May were born in Ukraine when they were under the Russian Empire. Although they had Jewish ethnic identity, they were not religious fanatics. They had been influenced by socialism and identified themselves as left-wing nationalists. These four individuals mentioned earlier were early leaders of Israel, all belonging to the left-wing camp. They knew that both Jews and Arabs were oppressed in the past, and they acknowledged that they gained a piece of land through extreme maneuvering. They supported the establishment of a Palestinian state, because only with the establishment of a formal national entity could normal diplomatic relations be promoted and tensions eased. However, the right-wing camp was different. In the past, they held emotions, but once they gained power, they formed an alliance called the Likud Group. In 1977, they successfully seized power in the elections. What is the Likud Group? Their precursor was the terrorist organization Irgun, which carried out bombings in hotels and Arab villages. One of the important leaders of this terrorist organization was named Begin. In 1977, he became prime minister representing the right-wing camp for the first time. In 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon and instigated the massacre of Palestinian refugees by Lebanese Christians. This was all initiated by Begin. After leaving office, his successor Shamir was even more extreme and had been a member of the Lehi organization, which was even more radical than the Irgun. Later on, power alternated between the left and right wing in Israel's domestic politics. The left wing still hoped to promote peace, because Israel had survived and continuing the war had no meaning. They wanted to quickly negotiate with the Palestinians, normalize relations, and develop peacefully. The right wing saw it differently. They had emotions before, but once they tasted power, they realized how precious it was. If there were no wars, they couldn't incite populism, and world peace would prevail. Then what would they be needed for? In 1993, when the United States was trying to make a deal, Israeli Prime Minister Rabin, a left-wing politician, went to Washington and shook hands with Palestinian Liberation Organization leader Arafat, deciding to establish a Palestinian self-government and prepare to recognize Palestinian control over the Gaza Strip, parts of the West Bank, and Jordan. However, Rabin was assassinated by radical elements, and the prospects of peace were shattered. Then the fighting continued. In 1996, a politician named Benjamin Netanyahu emerged on the political scene in Israel. He came from a scholarly family, with his father being a contributor to the Hebrew Encyclopedia, considered the first batch of workers who constructed Israeli history. Netanyahu himself served in the military and studied in the United States for an extended period. After graduating, he joined the Boston Consulting Group and worked alongside prominent Republican figure Mitt Romney. However, his political career faced setbacks when a Palestinian group hijacked a plane carrying over 100 Jewish passengers in 1976. The Israeli Special Forces carried out Operation Thunderbolt, a textbook example of modern special operations, resulting in only one casualty. Unfortunately, that casualty was Netanyahu's brother, turning the operation into a personal tragedy for him. Israel's political system is similar to the parliamentary system in the United Kingdom. The Prime Minister is elected by the people through the selection of parliamentary members. To become the Prime Minister, a candidate needs the support of at least 61 members. In 1996, Israel amended its election law to allow direct voting for the Prime Minister, resembling the system in the United States. Netanyahu seized this opportunity by hiring a US campaign team and won the election. However, his lack of political experience led to a vote of no confidence, and he was ousted from office. Later, the election method was changed back to parliamentary elections, because being the Prime Minister without party support proved to be meaningless. One notable Prime Minister was Ariel Sharon, one of the most renowned commanders in the Israeli military, who achieved impressive results in the Third and Fourth Middle East Wars. He was nicknamed the King of Israel. As a conservative, Sharon promoted Israel's unilateral withdrawal from the Gaza Strip after becoming the Prime Minister. However, this contradicted the principles of the Likud party, so Sharon left the party and formed the Kadima party. Unfortunately, he suffered a stroke and retired. Surprisingly, Sharon became the last hope for peace in Israel. In 2009, Netanyahu was re-elected as Prime Minister and began his long tenure, during which he transformed into a power-hungry figure. To maintain his ruling coalition, he resorted to drastic measures, even if it meant reshaping Israel completely. Only 2 direct elections for Prime Minister have been held in Israel, and the current system has returned to parliamentary elections, similar to those in the UK and Germany. To hold power, one must control the parliament. The Likud party finds it challenging to secure 61 seats on its own, so alliances are necessary. Let's take a look at the parties that form these governing coalitions. Among them is the Shoz party, the second largest party in the coalition, representing the interests of Orthodox Jews. There is also the United Torah Judaism, representing religious Zionism and the interests of the most conservative Orthodox Jews. These parties mainly advocate for religious and nationalist interests. They are easily recognizable with their distinctive appearance, such as long beards, white shirts, black coats, black hats, and side curls. Their primary occupation is studying religious texts and waiting for salvation from God. According to religious doctrine, they believe men should not seek wealth and, therefore, do not work. However, women are expected to work to support the household. The people who write religious texts have found a clever way to exempt themselves from work and hire nannies while promoting procreation. As a result, these families have an average of 7 children, and they already account for 12% of the total population of Israel, reaching nearly 1.3 million people in 2022. With the increasing population, their communities continue to expand, and some extreme individuals within the community may become more radical. They get angry and protest, or even cause damage, if they see women riding bicycles or appearing on billboards. For men, their main focus is studying religious law in yeshivas, religious schools. Many of these schools receive funding from the United States and do not teach subjects like science, mathematics, foreign languages, or social sciences. In 2018, there were 134,000 students studying in yeshivas, with a growth rate of 6%. Despite their high poverty rate of 53% due to their dedication to religious studies, they are still active in exercising their civil rights, such as voting. They are a significant voting bloc, and Netanyahu, in order to maintain his ruling coalition, has actively courted their support. One of the most contradictory issues between Netanyahu's coalition and the ultra-Orthodox Jews is military service. Israel is a country constantly at war, and its citizens are obligated to serve in the military. However, the ultra-Orthodox Jews are exempt from military service, as they believe their role is to protect the Jewish people spiritually rather than physically. This exemption was agreed upon by the Likud Party in 2002. In 2012, the Supreme Court declared the exemption law unconstitutional. By that time, Netanyahu was already the prime minister and relied on support from extreme conservative factions. To appease the ultra-Orthodox Jews, he introduced alternative national service, allowing them to serve in the police or fire departments for 6 months, which was also declared unconstitutional in 2013. Furthermore, 2 secular right-wing parties gained significant seats in the Knesset. Yisrael Beitenu, representing the interests of Jewish immigrants from the former Soviet Union, became the second-largest party. The anti-religious Orthodox Future Party secured the third-largest number of seats. These parties represent secular right-wing interests. Netanyahu continued to appease and make compromises to gain their support. For instance, legislation was introduced that exempted individuals over the age of 26 from military service, indirectly allowing many ultra-Orthodox Jews to be exempted until they reach the age of 40. Despite their population reaching nearly 1.3 million, less than 2,000 ultra-Orthodox soldiers are conscripted each year. Ironically, as devout Jews, the ultra-Orthodox do not fully recognize the establishment of Israel. They believe that Jewish wandering is the will of God, and that the doctrine does not suggest the creation of Israel. While they enjoy generous welfare benefits, they actively protest at various events, joining people from around the world in opposing Israel. Some extremist groups even believe that Palestine should eliminate Israel and let this God-forsaken regime perish quickly. So, the government cannot control the Haredi people, as they only listen to their religious leaders, the rabbis. Therefore, a religious court was specially established for them to authenticate who is a true Jew, because Israel's national policy is that all Jews in the world can immigrate to Israel except for checking if their mother is Jewish. It depends on whether they believe in Judaism or not, which is determined by the religious court. Before our country's Kaifong period, some people wanted to go to Israel, thinking that they were descendants of Jews, but the rabbis did not recognize them, so they failed to go. Netanyahu's administration has implemented discriminatory policies, almost making all non-Orthodox and black Jews into second-class citizens, except for white Orthodox Jews. For example, Ethiopia, a Christian country on the Horn of Africa, has a group of black Jews due to the influence of Zionism in the black Christian area. Reggae music is strongly influenced, and there are many songs about Zionism. In 1975, white Jews announced the acceptance of black Jews and named them Beta Jews. You see, Beta means second-class people. 30,000 people have arrived since then. When they were first accepted, they were recognized as Jews, but when they arrived at grassroots communities, the rabbis immediately changed their minds, saying that they were not orthodox enough to form their own religious court or appoint their own rabbi. Netanyahu has launched a series of discriminatory policies. He regards all African immigrants as illegal, claiming that they are destroying Israel's purity and democracy. Since 2010, he has even secretly injected contraceptive needles into Ethiopian immigrants. Third, he continuously creates ethnic conflicts, keeping society focused on turmoil and security issues for a long time. For example, he always says that he supports the establishment of a Palestinian state, but he only says without taking action. When the Palestinians can no longer bear it and want to attack, he says that they are all terrorists and extreme organizations, and then launches carpet bombing. Do you familiar with this trick? In 2014, for example, when 4 Jews died, Netanyahu launched carpet bombing on TV, making everyone feel that he was an invincible warrior. In 2018, he passed the nationality law because Israel does not have a formal constitution, so the nationality law to some extent acts as the definition of citizens in the constitution, directly stating that Israel is a Jewish state. But we need to ask, is Israel really a Jewish state? Israel has always given the outside world the impression that it is a Jewish state. However, as the mainstream white Jews account for only 74% of the total population, it is a diverse country. When this nationality law was enacted, it basically regarded more than 20% of other ethnic groups as second-class people in terms of law and personality. The right wing holds a hammer and sees everyone as a nail, and they do not go to develop their political wisdom, using violence and oppression to solve all problems. They turn to Arabs whenever something happens. After a series of indiscriminate bombings, terrorist organizations have become ruling parties. They embrace the Haredi, belong to racism, suppress left-wing, belong to anti-communism, oppress Arabs, belong to extreme nationalism and chauvinism, give others contraceptive injections, belong to social Darwinism, and even bully black Jews, tapping into antisemitism. Think about it, isn't there a term that represents them? Nazis. When I was young, many public intellectuals helped Israel to create the identity of a Jewish state and used the conservatism of Haredi to represent all Jews. For example, many articles often said that Jews are very attached to traditional culture and can trace their clothing, food, housing, and transportation back to more than 3,000 years ago. They strictly observe the Sabbath after sunset on every Friday. Trading, cooking, driving, and using cell phones are all prohibited. This is entirely different from my experience in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv under Israel's current control. As we said at the beginning, most of Israel's founding population was European Jews who were very secular. There may be some activities on the Sabbath, such as chatting with family members together, but it is impossible to have a blackout without using mobile phones. Kids cannot live without mobile phones, just like anywhere else in the world. Many Jewish traditional festivals have become national festivals in their understanding and have been secularized. When I arrived in Tel Aviv during Hanukkah, I saw many Haredi people handing out leaflets on the square, explaining the religious meaning of Hanukkah. But most secular people just pass by. In terms of social rights, Haredi people do not work, pay taxes, or fight, but receive welfare benefits. As their population grows, their power in parliament has increased, and they constantly use conservatism to squeeze the lives of ordinary people. Secular Jews must fight, work, pay taxes, and be pointed out by the Haredi people. The second economic issue. This topic is quite extensive. Let's first talk about Israel's economic advantages, and then we can discuss the economic issues. There was a book that became particularly popular in China called Startup Nation, which many Chinese entrepreneurs recommended. Some intellectuals also led reflections, wondering why such a small country like Israel could achieve such great development. Of course, I have spoken with some Israelis and there are some things worth learning from them, but there are also some things that cannot be learned and are purely exaggerated. First, let's talk about some basic data. In 2022, Israel's GDP was $527 billion, with a per capita GDP of $55,359. What is worth learning from Israel is their strong sense of vulnerability due to the scarcity of resources. From a government perspective, the economy takes the lead, regardless of whether it is left-wing or right-wing. They focus on promoting economic development, driving industries, and providing various investment subsidies as important aspects of their work. They provide a lot of support and inspections for innovative projects and have policies that foster competition. Today, Israel's pillar industries include military technology, telecommunications, computer software, medical devices, biotechnology, engineering, agriculture, aviation, and technology, among others. These industries are all highly advanced. For example, Teva is the world's largest non-patent pharmaceutical company. Checkpoint Software Technologies is a global leader in network security products, and the Albert System is a renowned defense contractor. In 2021, Israel's total exports amounted to $135 billion, with service exports accounting for 51% and goods exports accounting for 49%. There is a contentious issue regarding Israeli agriculture. In all modern industrialized countries, agriculture does not account for a high proportion of the GDP. However, some people argue that Israeli agriculture is developed, while others claim that the myth of Israeli agriculture has been debunked. In the early years, Israel was self-sufficient in agriculture because there were only a little over 3 million people in the country in the 1970s. But now, the number of non-working enemy has reached nearly 1.3 million. Therefore, they have long abandoned the policy of self-sufficiency and rely heavily on food imports. Given Israel's scarcity of resources, their agricultural technology has always focused on energy saving, genetic enhancement, and high-tech equipment. For example, 44% of agricultural water comes from recycled water, without compromising product quality. Additionally, dairy farming and milk production rates are among the highest in the world, with an average annual milk production of 10,200 liters per cow. Honestly speaking, Israel's agricultural technology is worth learning and exchanging, but their agricultural policies are not feasible for most countries. Israel can confidently rely on imports, because regardless of how remarkable their achievements may be, they will not face sanctions from Europe or the United States, nor will they experience food embargoes. Other countries do not have that luxury. This leads us to the part that cannot be learned. After the establishment of Israel, a large number of Jewish scientists from the Soviet Union immigrated there. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, even more technology talents flooded into Israel. In the early stages, Israel had a relatively good reserve of talents. The second part that cannot be learned is they combine military service with entrepreneurship quite well, and with a favorable government investment environment, many people start businesses with their fellow soldiers after completing their service. They use the problems encountered during their military service to provide technical solutions. Another advantage is their relationship with Europe and America. The world order we currently live in centers around the United States, and the US is very open to Israel from government to capital markets. Looking at Israel's pillar industries, they include military technology, electronic communication, computer software, medical equipment, biotechnology, engineering, agriculture, and aviation. These happen to be areas where the US excels, so the US is unlikely to hamper Israel. You can think of Israel as a module that complements the US economy and industry. For Israeli entrepreneurs, the smoothest path to entrepreneurship is through military service and solving some small technological barriers, then going public in the US or selling to American companies. Many American companies directly establish research and development centers in Israel, such as Intel, Microsoft, and Apple. The first thing to note is that their overseas research and development center is located in Israel. IBM, Google, HP, and Facebook all have research and development centers in Israel. Currently, there are over 80 Israeli companies listed on Nasdaq, making Israel the third largest country listed. Why does Israel need to develop high technology? Because apart from the impressive high-tech industry, Israel does not do well in many daily economic activities. For example, in the OECD, an index called hourly GDP, which reflects the production efficiency of economies, Israel ranks behind Turkey and Japanese workers who are enthusiastic about working overtime. their production efficiency is relatively low. If we shift our focus away from the high-tech industry, Israel also has serious economic problems. They are in a tense state with neighboring countries and are, in fact, an isolated economy. They highly rely on imported daily necessities, but government corruption is apparent. Some enterprises start lobbying the government after becoming large, and then pass legislation to establish so-called industry standards to protect domestic industries. For example, we say that Israel relies on imported food, but imported agricultural products are already expensive. The government will set import quotas for specific products. For monopolistic enterprises, they enjoy preferential tax treatment, and the government levies high tariffs on other imported daily necessities on the grounds of protecting domestic enterprises. Ultimately, this highly competitive area becomes monopolized by established companies, leaving only 2 or 3 major players in each mature industry to call the shots. The West likes to play rankings and release indices, such as the Corruption Perceptions Index, which can bring confidence to foreign investment and is a powerful tool for manipulating world discourse. Like the West, many corrupt practices have been legalized in Israel, and the youth index has been rising. So, Israel has always been high on this list, to some extent leading people to overlook the problems that directly affect international livelihoods. Due to Israel's tense relationship with neighboring countries, defense spending is also increasing. In 2021, 12.6% of the government's expenditure was invested in defense. Therefore, they have little money to invest in civilian affairs, leading to very high prices in Israel. When I went to Tel Aviv, spending 100 yen per person on food was nowhere near enough. This highlights the problem of low quantity and high price. In 2021, Tel Aviv surpassed Singapore and Paris, being named the most expensive city in the world by The Economist. However, we must note that Singapore and Paris are one of the international financial centers, while Tel Aviv is only the economic center of Israel, with a population of only 3.4 million in the metropolitan area, and only 400,000 in the city center. I remember watching a media interview with one of the residents in one of Tel Aviv's poorest communities, who paid monthly rent of NIS 14,000 for a 2-bedroom apartment. Also, one of the cheapest bread loaves costs NIS 40, and a pound of beef costs NIS 70, making Israel's prices very high. Israel has achieved its current economic success for several advanced reasons, but there is no need to boast. During the era of American hegemony, their relationship with the hegemonic center was a lesson that Arabs can learn. As a resource-poor country, if Israel can follow the path of victory in military conflicts and work to promote the establishment of Palestine and restore relations with neighbors, it can actually reduce a lot of social costs. However, Netanyahu's pursuit of votes has led to a consumption of Israel's national foundation. Although Israel's population seems to be growing rapidly, the birth rate of secular women continues to decline, and they have few soldiers reserved. Even with such high defense spending, Israel's finances are still tight, and soldiers' salaries are very low. Many officers and soldiers even sell military supplies to make ends meet. Long-term populist and nationalist confrontations have resulted in the Israeli people only being able to understand the use of violence to solve diplomatic issues with their neighbors. The political thinking of the ruling group is declining in complexity, either bombing, killing, or robbing, without a more visionary political concept. After decades of right-wing operations, the Labour Party, which originally established the country, has become a small party in the parliament. Recently, Netanyahu has begun to push judicial reforms again. We previously mentioned that Netanyahu's policy of flattering the Haredi has often been overturned by Israel's Supreme Court for obscenity. Therefore, this time, Netanyahu wants to attack the Supreme Court. The core content includes granting government departments the power to appoint judges to the Supreme Court, limiting the Supreme Court's review of legislation by Parliament.